A motorcycle's going by.
Okay.
All right. I'm Charlie Rossiter, and this is Poetry Spoken Here. Our feature today is Don Levy from Albany, New York. He's been an active member of the poetry scene there since 1988, reading at various venues, and he, in fact, created a couple of reading series, one at the Albany Art Gallery and a couple of others, and he also is an editor of the Albany Anthology. Add to that, he's very active in the community of poets in general, been on the board of the Hudson Valley Writers Guild and of Albany Poets, another organization. So, Don, it's great to have you here and talk about it.
Asking me. And I want to thank Dan for setting this up. So
that's it.
Cool. Very excited.
Dan Wilcox is our Capital Region Tech Advisor, assistant helper.
He is. He's a great guy.
An all-around good guy.
We're all grateful to have someone like him.
Definitely. And so so you first came out and started reading on the Albany poetry scene. How did that happen? How did you get started?
Well, I think what happened, I was always writing poetry since, I would say, when I was at Hudson Valley back in 81. Mm-hmm. But I never really had an audience. I went to a poetry workshop in Oneonta with Donald Peterson, who passed away a number of years ago at Oneonta, and that helped me a lot. And then one day, I probably was walking down Lark Street, and I saw a notice about the readings at the QE2, the open mic. And I remember, because Tom Nattell, as we remember, is our great friend, he was like, you only have 4 minutes. And I proceeded to read 6 poems, thinking that was 4 minutes. And then he's like, when he got up and he's like, no, you're only supposed to do 4 minutes. And I was huffy. I'm like, oh, I'll never come back. But really, there was nowhere else to read your poems. I guess you could read them in your living room to yourself in the mirror in the bathroom, but there was no place you could share your poetry. And
so you're a quick study in terms of figuring out what you can do in 4 minutes.
Yeah, but and I learned quickly what worked and what didn't work for me. So it was a great learning experience going to that open mic.
I feel like you often are a pretty funny guy. And I don't know, I kind of think you've gotten funnier over the years. Do you think that's true?
Well, thank you. It's funny. I remember those 6 poems. I can't remember the exact ones I read, but I know they were all serious because I was going to be a serious poet. And then I read the poem about the condoms. I saw, Joe London on GMA talk about condoms for like 20 minutes. And I thought it was hysterical. So I wrote this poem, something like, condoms come in many shapes and sizes, many colors and shapes, but the only things condoms don't come in is you. It's sort of like a play on the word come. And I couldn't believe all the people were laughing about it. And I couldn't believe that next month, Tom Nattell remembered it. It was like, oh, I didn't think, and I read it because Tom Nattell had the Midnight Mass for Andy Warhol. And so I thought, well, that's sort of a good Andy Warhol type of poem,
Yeah. All right. So learn what the audience likes.
Right.
All right.
And plus, in the QE2 back then, it was all dark in the back room, so you really couldn't see. And actually getting laughter was one of the best ways you knew how you were doing, whether people really liked you or they didn't think much of you,
Yeah, somebody's out there in the dark.
Yeah, it was totally dark. You couldn't see anyone. The lights were right at you.
For people who don't know, the QE2 is a rather remarkable venue that used to exist in Albany. It had been a White Castle restaurant turned into a nightclub. And I would tell people it's the kind of place where on a weekday night, two unknown maybe up and coming bands from Boston would be playing. The walls were painted black. The whole place was painted black.
It
It
was.
was, but there was an open mic poetry series there, which was quite interesting. And well-known poets when they came to town read there, like Allen Ginsberg and others. So it was a hell of
It
a
was an
place.
amazing place too because, I mean, back then he would have Tom Nattell, who ran it. He would have 35 people at one of these open mics. You know, everyone wanting to read, and it was so, you know. It was amazing that there's so many and so many different people. There was Linda Boulette, who called herself, well, I don't know if she called herself, but she was a housewife. You had Gil Purdy, who drove a cab. You had all these college students. You know, I wasn't working for the state, but I know Dan Wilcox was. So it was a great mix of different people. That's what made it exciting back then.
Yeah, it was extremely interesting, and then right there in downtown Albany. So, well, maybe we should hear a poem, Don. What do you say?
Okay, why don't I start off with one of my more recent poems? This one is sort of, I like it because it talks about my dad who passed away in 2004. And, you know, he was a sports writer. I was never into sports, but I did like every year ABC Wide World of Sports had diving from Acapulco. And for a gay kid like me, that was exciting. So this is called Divers.
Are you talking about the Speedos?
Yes, they had this,
Okay.
but you know, they were beautiful, beautiful guys, and they were diving off cliffs, which was dangerous. This is called Divers. Usually, I hated watching sports on TV with my dad, hated when a golf tournament went on too long, and I would miss the wonderful world of Disney. There was one sporting event though on ABC's Wide World of Sports that I loved watching with my dad every year, and that was the male diving from Acapulco. Beautiful, tall young men with grace and lean muscles would dive off the cliffs, and for some reason it was always filmed in black and white, and hopefully they would land in the ocean below. I loved how precise those divers had to be, 1 foot either way, and they might land in the rock on the rocks instead of the water. My dad seemed confused that I finally took an interest in the sport, even though it didn't involve a ball or violence in any way. I understood, though, as I watched each brave man dive off of the cliff, that I didn't really care who won. I just wanted to spend a Saturday afternoon watching handsome men cheat death and land in the cool Mexican water below.
Whoa. Yeah, I can see the picture.
It's one of those poems like you get a memory, and that's how it sort of started. Yeah.
Yeah. And when you write a poem like that, does it come pretty quickly or
Some poems do, some poems don't. You know,
uh,
I think I've gone over the years a system that sort of works for me. Sometimes I like to think about it in my head, and you shape the lines and you think of the images. Um, and, you know, that might take a week, 2 weeks, whatever, and then you feel like, okay, I can write this poem. There are others like what I'm going to read later that came all of a sudden. So it you know, I think as I got older, I don't do as many revisions because I
mhm.
sort of know what I'm looking for. And if I can't make it work, then I'm like, okay, I guess that's going with some being older. Like, okay, I'm not going to bother with it.
You don't have to salvage every single one that you start. Or maybe
Right,
you'll come back next year or something like
right.
that.
And
Uh,
sometimes I have come back to a theme,
uh-huh.
written a poem. I instead of like struggling for a couple days on a poem that's not really working. And I always use, I don't know if it's the right term. Sometimes my problem is I can't find a good ending. I call it overwriting. Like I keep writing and writing and writing, hoping that I will get the right
Oh,
ending. And then you just have this long poem and nothing seems to gel at the end.
yeah. Yeah, that's frustrating. I mean, and a common, I think a common problem I run into it sometimes, is I write an ending, but I think it just, I don't know, just doesn't sound right.
Well, it's like, when the gymnasts land perfectly, that's, you want to try that in poetry, but
Yeah.
it doesn't always happen.
Good point. Good point. Yeah, well, but do another poem.
What?
Do another poem.
Okay. Well, I'm going
Yeah.
to read.
Uh,
There's this website. Actually, it's on Instagram called Hot Dudes Reading. And it's basically these photos of good looking men in New York City reading on the subway. So I sort of thought of that as like the starting point of this poem called Hot Dudes Reading. I'm always on the lookout of hot dudes reading on the bus, in coffee houses, on park benches or stoops, or on their porch sipping lavender tea while reading Siddhartha. There are several of types of hot dudes reading. There's the casual Casanova waiting at the bus stop with a strand of his floppy hair draped sexily over one eye while reading Fear of Flying. There's the hot professor dude with a neatly trimmed beard reading Middlemarch on the 114 bus to Crossgates. There's the serious tattooed dude with his long blonde hair and the sleeves rolled up past the elbow to reveal his tattoo sleeves, standing over you on the bus ride home reading Love in the Time of Cholera. And there's the young man in the suit and tie at the doctor's office halfway through Infinite Jest, or the older George Clooney look-alike on the number 100 bus reading one of LBJ's biographies. And I fall in love with them all, trying to impress them when I take out of my backpack my battered copy of Dickens' 900-page Bleak House. I remember one summer day years ago, there was a tall, blonde haired guy in a well tailored blue suit who got off the number 10 bus at the corner of Western and Quail the same time I did. He was holding a copy of DeLillo's White Noise, a book I loved. At that minute, I fell in love right outside of Mary Jane's books. I wanted to ask him if he wanted to have a child with me, but he was much quicker crossing Western Avenue than I was. And before I could get out the words, "That's a great book," he was already across Western and seemed to disappear down the roads. And my dreams of the two of us having a ravening rainbows themed wedding was gone, and I stood alone. And just remember what they say about hot dudes reading big books.
that is it's interesting. I find it interesting with a poem like that when you're talking about all the different characters and all the different things they're reading. And I know from your many Facebook posts that you yourself just read a hell of a lot and are aware of a whole lot of uh, and I was wondering, how did you, can you say anything about how you came up with the titles of what these characters are reading?
Oh, well, some of it was, looking at the website itself because they had, like, they call one guy Casual Casanova. So I was like, okay, what would he be reading? Fear of Flying, and then the guy with the tattoo sleeve, for some reason he would be reading, Love at the Time of Cholera. It's just like sometimes you think of things, and then I thought, like, at the end of Gravity's Rainbow Themed Wedding, I thought, what's the craziest book that I would have a themed wedding to? And I'm like, okay, let's go with that.
So it's interesting. You went off of some idea you already had, or like a photo of a guy who would be the character, and from that you kind of free associated what would go with it.
Yeah, well, usually I don't do that all the time. Usually there's something that happens, and I'm like, okay, I want to write about it. It's it's sometimes it's just when it hits you, and they're like, okay, this would make a good poem. There are times though, like I wanted to write about how there were some people in the gay community who were upset that Trump didn't do a proclamation for Pride for Stonewall. And all I could think of is him doing, like, we have the biggest homos. You have not seen the biggest homos, but we have, something like that. But that's the only line I could come up with, like big homos. And okay, so I thought, I didn't write that. I'm like, okay, that's not going to work.
Okay. It was like a concept, but you couldn't like flush it out with.
I know I can't flesh it out.
Well, I was interested.
Yeah,
and this issue interests me. This kind of poem interests me a bit because now I couldn't tell just hearing it this one time, but the rhythm of the titles that you could choose to put in fit. What they did, nothing was jarring. They fit. So I'm just thinking, you have a choice of Bleak House, Middlemarch, whatever,
right?
And sometimes that's a factor because in that situation you have a lot of choice of what book do I want the guy to be reading.
Well, I think I learned a lot of that from Franco O'Hara, because it wouldn't be like I'm on the street, I'm on 37th Street, and I'm at this store, I'm buying, this kind of cigarettes, and I think learning from him, I think that's a great way of learning to be a writer, because if you just like, I'm walking down the street, okay, that's sort of boring. It doesn't really tell me it. It could be any street in America. If I say I'm walking down Fifth Avenue and I'm going to Bergdorf's or something, at least you have an image now of what's going on.
Yeah, with a lot of connotation to it.
Yeah, I think that's why Frank O'Hara is one of my all-time favorite poets, and I think I got a lot out of that, learning not just about his sense of humor, which is amazing. He was able to turn things on a dime with his, clever phrasing and everything. But I think it was very specific, like, the poem about when Billie Holiday died. It's like one place after another after another. And he doesn't really mention her by name, except in the title, The Day Lady Died.
Yeah, but that's a great poem.
It's just amazing that you feel like you're there with him. And like, okay, and that's when, at the end, when he feels the emotion, when he reads the headline, that's why the poem works, I think.
Yeah. Okay, well, we better get another poem in here.
Yeah.
All right, that's interesting.
Is there anything else you want?
Well, just spinning off of what you're saying, and as I said, that issue interests me. I feel like that's a later part of poem writing, when you've got it down, and then you're looking at what this guy is reading this book. Do I like that one for him, or would I rather like a title with an M in it, or a G or something like that?
It's just like, and I do remember that guy reading White Noise got off the bus because he was a very beautiful young man, and he walked away before I could say anything. But I think it's a process too. You figure out, like, I like their poems. I talk about gay, you know, I try to
Yeah.
pick out, like, if it's a poem about a gay character, I'll try, I can't use like a name like Tony or Frank. It has to be something like Van, like in, Modern Family, you have these names like Lamarcus and Longinus, and they're great names. Like, someone took the time to think of what are we going to name these people.
Right.
And maybe I'll read another.
All right.
This one I just wrote about. We were talking about the QE2 days, and I was reading some of my older poems, going through them. And I didn't really bring a lot of the ones I read because, a lot of them are so old, and I don't really relate to some of them. But I was reading them, and something struck me about them. And so I'll read this: reading old poems. I forgot most of them, to be honest. I probably wrote too many poems during my early days when I'd read at the QE2 open mic. You wanted to read a new poem every month. That was a goal of mine. I wrote a poem about a skateboard shop on Lark Street that didn't last more than a year. I wrote poems about Lake George, or jewelry store in Soho about condoms, poems about condoms and lobsters in Grand Union. What embarrasses me most, though, is not the awkward phrasing or the typos or my overuse of alliteration, but that I was in my late 20s, early 30s, and I did not come out. Never told people the person I wanted to play hooky in one poem was my boyfriend at the time, or the person in another poem who broke up with me and rode his bike down Delaware Avenue in the moonlight was another boyfriend, or the person I was flirting in one poem at a bar downtown was a male poet I had a crush on for many years. It's sad that I never used the correct pronoun. Never was brave enough back then to come out to all the poets squeezed tight in the dark back room of the QE2.
Yeah.
I'm now learning how to type poems up on my phone.
Wow.
I'm such a Luddite.
Well, you're ahead of me on that one.
I realized, that's much simpler than going to the library and typing up poems. My brother gave me a notebook, and he uses a cloud, but that doesn't help you when you need
right. When you need to have it right there to read.
Yeah. So,
do you have anything to say? You mentioned just before we went on the air, you might say that you might have something to say about the poetry scene there in Albany. It's very unique. It's extensive for a town that size. I think
it's been amazing. I mean, I've been part of it since 1988. I'm surprised that we keep on going forward. We keep on getting new names, new people. It has changed over the years because, back when we were doing it, back in the 80s and 90s, there was no internet. There was no, Facebook. There was no YouTube. And now there are all these entities you can post your poetry to. So I think some people don't come out to readings because of that. But I think when people do go, they sort of, hopefully they get hooked, like, oh, this is interesting. Plus you can meet people easier than if you're on your computer and yes, you're typing to Joe in Oregon, but you're not in the same room really talking about the same stuff. So I've always been a big advocate of readings. I love it when someone new comes along and you're just blown away and like, who is that person? I want to meet them. I talk about everything, not just poetry, but movies and whatever. So I know it's sort of old-fashioned readings. It has changed, but I still love it. I still get excited going to them. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a very vibrant scene. You have a lot of choices over there.
Oh
In
yeah,
that area
and I
of
feel
readings to
bad
go to.
because it has to be over a year since I've gone to Cafe Lena, and I love Carol Grazer and the work she does. And I just not having a car, not driving, I can't get up there. But there's so many great. I love the reading in Schenectady, at Arthur's Market. They do a great job.
Yeah.
And of course, Dan's reading, Poets Speak Loud. We're lucky. We really are lucky.
Yeah. Yeah. For especially for a smaller city, not a major city.
Right. I mean,
Well,
we're not in New York City. We're not Boston.
Right.
But then
Well,
I
Don?
hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, I wish we had what you had in Albany." So I'm like, there's some communities where the poets don't come together. And that's sad, I think.
I'm glad we were coming together and we've done the podcast.
Yeah.
Got it. That's beautiful. Thanks for the poems and
Thank
the
you for the
opinions.
opportunity.
Always glad to put a voice out there, a good voice, and your poems. It's been really nice. Thanks for doing it.
Thank you, Charlie.
All right. We've been visiting with Don Levy, poet from Albany, New York. This is Poetry Spoken Here.